All right, and so moving on to our final presentation of the day, we are concluding with transforming odor mitigation through environmental intelligence, joined today by Marc Byers, the founder and president of Byers Scientific, as well as Greg. Oh my gosh, Greg, I'm so sorry. Tell me how to pronounce your last name.
Bracci. That's
Bracci. Okay, I was going to guess it. Live broadcast, folks. Greg Bracci, vice president of Envirosuite. I'm going to read a brief introduction here, and then folks, we'll get right into the conversation. So, of course, today's presentation is transforming odor mitigation through environmental intelligence. In April, Envirosuite and Byers Scientific formed a strategic partnership blending environmental intelligence with industrial odor mitigation. As a true industry first, this new partnership allows waste facilities to visualize, monitor, and model odorous emissions in real time. This innovative approach to monitor emissions and precisely target odor sources has become paramount for developing the optimum odor management strategies, allowing confidence in and transparency between solid waste facilities and their neighboring communities. So again, thank you for joining Greg, Marc, and myself. We're going to discuss the revolutionizing of tackling solid waste emissions effectively through today's leading technology. So thanks again to you both for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Marissa.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here.
Thank you. So I'm going to kick it off. I'm going to continue on in the conversation. What is the problem we're looking at today, the problem we're trying to solve, and what we're seeing happening in the waste industry at a macro level?
Well, I'll lead off with that. As Greg and I have discussed before, suburban populations continue to expand further away from cities and expand in general, right? The natural consequence is that they move into closer quarters with landfills and other municipal waste facilities. And so this naturally raises greater awareness of the externalities that these facilities sometimes impose on populations, right? By virtue of noise, traffic, potentially odor, clearly odor, but we don't want to say every time that happens. So we want to say potentially, to be fair. So we're addressing these issues with 21st century technology, we believe. When Byers Scientific deploys an odor mitigation system, we can measure various gases and VOCs in the area, but our Achilles heel is knowing with a high degree of certainty where they're emanating from, and even more importantly, where they're going. So working with Greg and the Envirosuite team and deploying various technologies they offer, that fills in the missing gap, which ultimately translates into a better experience for the surrounding community. So we've really begun to see a greater acknowledgement by operators, and whether they're privately or publicly owned and operated, to address community needs and concerns and to actually use these tools that we offer to increase community engagement. That's really the key, right?
Yep.
Without community acceptance of the existence of these facilities, we can't efficiently move the process forward. And by that, I mean, when the community acknowledges the facility, we'll say a landfill, and the facility acknowledges that they may be in fact imposing externalities on the community, then a dialogue can start to occur that gets stakeholder interests aligned. And by stakeholders, I mean the community and the operator. You kind of almost imagine everyone acknowledges each other sitting around the table. Then the operator can acknowledge nearby receptors and begin to actually identify who's truly being impacted, odor drifting off site, for example. But more importantly, we can begin to empower the community to share in that data review so that both, the truth, but also spurious claims can be addressed. So I see the problem. Really what we're accomplishing here is communication ultimately, but we're using a lot of technology to do it. ESG and environmental justice is certainly a part of the bigger macro view that we start to see. I think Greg speaks well to that with the Envirosuite package.
Yeah, thanks, Marc. I think if we look at it, not just in landfills and not just in waste, but ESG in general is a significant focus for industries as they're progressing forward, right? If we start on the environmental aspect of ESG, right, it's really all around sustainability. Okay, facilities need to grow. They need to continue to operate. The dependence, the requirement for landfills to be able to freely operate is critical here in the US. The problem, though, is how do we do that sustainably? Okay, so what technologies, what can we deploy? Therefore, we need to add cells. We need to get new permits for new facilities. How are we able to do that without actually getting the community pushback? When we go to the social and the government's aspect of it, Marc talked about environmental justice, right? And environmental justice is obviously a very, very important topic. Environmental justice really is, it's the enforcement of the environmental laws and regulations on underserviced populations and certain population densities. So you look at states like New Jersey, they've put legislation in place now with their S-232 legislation, where the state DEP now has to look at facilities, specifically landfills, where it was called out there, to understand what is their potential impact on these I would say, overburdened communities. And so because of that, right, there's a requirement to not just to do this, to focus on it, but actually to understand, what is potentially happening. And to Marc's point, what is not happening at your facility. So you're not falsely accused of doing something you didn't do. And then the other piece of that is obviously the community engagement aspect of it. For facilities to grow and to continue to operate, you need that social acceptance. Okay, so being transparent with the community, sharing, not just sharing data, but proactively reaching out, having communications, and deciding what's happening is critical to work together.
Definitely. And I want to ask, both of you, why, solving this problem, why this was important to both Byers and Envirosuite. Either of you can kick it off, but just, the importance of solving this problem.
Well, I'll take it from honestly a purely pragmatic point of view. And the reality is, I think many of us on this conversation are not nonprofits. We are getting paid to solve a problem, and it's a problem that needs to be solved. And so, as I've said in previous interviews and things, odor is never going to go away. Trash is never going to go away. It's always, we're going to make waste. And so we're going to have to deal with that waste, period. And so the more that I team up with strategic partners like Greg and Envirosuite to get the job done effectively and efficiently, it moves the ball forward for everybody. It keeps the landfill in business. It turns out to almost be a public good, right? The garbage has to go somewhere. It is just the reality.
Right.
And so it's important to me to keep the process moving, because keeping the process moving helps me be part of it. And that's what we would call in economics, that's a virtuous cycle, right?
Yeah, and I think from an Envirosuite side, it is our mission statement. I mean, our mission statement is we harness the power of environmental intelligence so that operations can operate sustainably, but communities can thrive, right? And it's that intersection between community and operations that who we are. We've been working with industries such as waste for over 30 years in doing this. And I think one of the critical things, as Marc said, is that there has to be science behind it. You need to have data to transparently understand what's happening and to have the discussions and have productive discussions with the community. And that's really where Envirosuite sits, is it's science-backed technology, understanding what's going to happen and then predicting the future.
And so you both touched on it briefly, but I'd love to expand on how your combined offerings help solve this problem, what you deliver, and ultimately why you folks are the right people for the job.
Yeah, Marissa, thanks for that. So Marc and I thought that also be best. There's sometimes pictures do better in telling a story. And so Marc and I just wanted to show.
Great.
Show kind of a couple of slides in talking about what we're doing. So we talked about, kind of the importance, if you will, of understanding what's going on around your facility, around your landfill. And so the first thing with that is understanding the emissions. So understanding, I know that the previous speakers were talking about noise and potential noise issues, right? And so it's like, understanding your noise emissions, understanding your odor emissions, where they're coming from. But most importantly, it's actually the hyper local weather information. Okay, you need to know historically and right now what's happening in the weather, but also you need to be able to very accurately predict what's happening in the future with weather. Odor is moved by wind patterns and other weather phenomena. And so having a very, very sound understanding of that is critical in this process. Then what you do is it's the community engagement aspect of it. And, we talked about this a minute ago, but it's really important. There's many times when an odor leaves a landfill, right, it will go into the community. But understanding historically what would happen is that people would just look at a weather information and say, oh, the wind's coming from the north now, so that's where the odor must have come from, or that's where the odor must have traveled. The problem is weather is very complex. It changes continuously. So you can't just look at the weather from right now. You need to look at the weather from the last 10 minutes, the last hour, the last 2 hours to truly understand where the odor is coming from. And then understanding frequently, it's actually not coming from the landfill. Landfills are in facilities quite often that have other industrial facilities around them. They're in complex environments, right? They sometimes can be visibly noticed as the most visible person in the neighborhood, but very often they're not the source of the odor. And so using technology to actually predict and understand, I had a complaint from yesterday, was the odor at that residence, did it come from my landfill? And that's really what you see here, is you see what is called a back trajectory in the industry, but it's saying the odor that's at my house, where did it come from, 10 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago, an hour ago, to see if in fact it did come from the facility or did it not. And I mentioned this earlier, but all of this leads into, if you will, a very transparent and productive conversation with the community, right? If you go back to the mission here, the mission is really, how do we continue to operate sustainably? How do we grow the operations because of the importance, but do it in line with community expectations and without community pushback? And then the last piece that you look at here is really about what we call the planning phase of it. So if you look at the planning, as we talked about, you need to have science behind this. So what you see here is actually a plume. It's an emissions plume. So it's using science to understand, where is the emissions going to go coming out of my facility? Where are the odors going to travel? Are they going to travel? Are they going to reach communities? Okay, this can be done proactively to understand, okay, tomorrow I know the wind conditions, so I believe I'm going to have an emission source that's going to come out of my facility, and yes, it is in fact going to reach the community. So then I can proactively decide today what I want to do about that tomorrow. Do I want to operate in a different cell? Do I want to change? And I know some of these are longer term plays, but you can do this weeks ahead of time as well. Do I want to change the cell I'm operating in? Do I want to change the size of the face, the location of the face? There's all these different levers that you can pull in a waste facility and in a landfill that actually can potentially minimize the impact. And I think for me, that's one thing that in talking to a lot of people, they say, well, Greg, what can I do about it? And this really is one of the most important things of what you can do about it. What changes can I make? And then for me, the last thing also is really about deployment of the odor mitigation technology, right? And this is why we're so excited to partner with Byers Scientific. And this is why we feel like there's such a unique perspective that these two organizations bring to the facility, because not only can you understand tomorrow, but then you can actually understand, and Marc will talk a little bit about it, what can I deploy, what can I do differently, specifically around odor mitigation?
Yeah, the question, why are we the right people to solve the problem? And I would slightly correct it or alter it, I should say. Why are we the right team to solve the problem? Because what Greg just described is precisely why this works, why it's leveraging technology. The mobile system, Greg mentioned, we may not be able to move a work face very quickly, but we can certainly move all around the work face. And when we know ahead of time what tomorrow's likely going to look like, we developed a mobile system that is as rigorous and robust as any, quote, traditional perimeter system yet it is fully self-contained and can go anywhere right up on the workface. You can see this, you can see the workface in the background here. We designed that to be a lot more nimble, right? And to take cues off of what the environmental intelligence is telling us. Again, that allows for flexibility. We can, as I said before, this thing is great, but I guess the bullet is only as accurate as the gun, right? We have to have direction on how to do it the most appropriately. Clearly, before we teamed up with Envirosuite, we'd have an idea of where to deploy something maybe downwind, but there's a bit of a wet finger in the air there. Here, now we're refining, we're really precise. And, we find also by doing that, Greg's, Envirosuite sensors, they may be pinging something that's off of the face, and we get a discovery there that, informs even further how we're deploying, or we may have discovered actually a leak somewhere that the landfill wasn't aware of.
Marc, I want to ask you. Oh, I'm so sorry. I wanted to just to, before I forget, to your point, is it that precision that really makes this technology, maybe powerful is not the right word, but is it that precision that really sets it apart from maybe some of the other things that were tried in the past? Yeah,
well, there's no doubt. I mean, we have obviously competitors that we work with that are highly capable and they have great equipment and effective equipment. But without a map sort of the best way to do it, then it is, it is just kind of throwing stuff and seeing what sticks. So precision is extremely important. And moreover, we take that data, we go back and look at it. That's the key. We're going back and looking at it, and it becomes predictive. It creates track record, and it allows, especially, and we've seen this firsthand in a couple of sites where it engages the community to come and better understand what are we doing, how are we doing it, and what's the authenticity of it. It really is more effective when we're teaming up with this. You saw what Greg's slides show. The amount of precision is really breathtaking, and that also helps kind of assign. I don't say like attorneys, their job is to assign blame, right? And there is a little bit of an element of that, whether it's back onto the landfill on us, are we positioned right? Or is the landfill being, or the facility, because it's not just landfills, are they being unfairly targeted for something? We know empirically or anecdotally so many cases of a person standing looking at the landfill with the wind at their back, claiming the landfill stinks. Right. And so this removes any of that ambiguity and just puts hard data to it.
Thank you for that. I'll let you keep, I apologize for interrupting. I'll let you keep going. Describe what we're looking at on your screen here.
I guess this is an animation of the basic idea, which is we're taking, within this device, we're taking a neutralizer, a plant-based, water-based, but plant oil water-based product that has been refined, quite frankly, over the years. So in the last about year and a half, our partner at OMI Industries came up with an amazing product. And we can say amazing because we have demonstrable results with it. We take that product, with a patent that I was fortunately awarded through a process, we transition into a vapor state and then deliver it. And so we're effectively trying to put out a vapor barrier, a wall of active chemistry. This is key. It's not masking. We don't use that word, of course. It is active chemistry, and offline we're always happy to talk to people what the actual chemical reactions are occurring. But through this process, we're very efficiently transitioning that liquid into its vapor state and sending it up into the air so it can interact. And of course, we want to know, we want to get into that airstream and have interaction. And clearly, when we have more data telling us how to position that the best, you can see where we get a bit of an advantage there.
Where can folks go to find out more about this technology? Just more about both Byers and Envirosuite, and just to learn more information about this?
Well, of course, our website, Byers Scientific, and we have a page, a whole bunch of stuff dedicated specifically to our relationship with Envirosuite. I say our partnership. It is a partnership. It's a strategic partnership. And one thing I didn't mention on the with the equipment as well as everything that we build. This is really important. Everything we build has its own website, basically, right? So. All the units are cloud-based, so they can be remote controlled, monitored, operated. And so the nice thing about that is we can empower the operator from his phone to make changes to the machine based on his Envirosuite dashboard, right? So that's another thing we didn't really get into too much, that we really try and empower the operators to own their Envirosuite platform, their dashboard, and learn how to use it. And we're there to help them. But they start to become owners of that technology, and then they start to understand how to deploy their equipment, and they can rely on our cloud-based ability to refine that even further.
Yeah, it seems like I've had a number of conversations with folks in the industry. It seems like this cloud-based software, no matter what issue you're looking to tackle, seems like that's where the industry's going. It just, like you said, it's really empowering to make decisions with up-to-date information, and it seems like that's what you're using here as well.
Certainly. Well, IoT, Industrial Internet of Things, IoT, which is clearly the future. Well, the future is now in this respect.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, because you look at it's the inputs that go into the software, and then it's actually the science and the technology in the software. And as Marc talked about with the IoT, I mean, being able to measure compounds. If you look at whether it's a C&D landfill or a municipal landfill, there's different facilities have different compounds that they would emit and that they would want to focus on. And the technology of just measuring that continues to evolve very, very quickly, right? But it's actually then taking that information, those measurements, and then how do I marry that up with the hyperlocal weather information to then really predict, what's going to happen so I can change my operations. And if you look at the corporate focus, like we talked about, the corporate focus on just ESG in general is just such a large requirement, and really what's driving this.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful. If I don't want to cut off your presentation, so if there's any more slides, I'd love to look at those, but I do have some questions to ask as we continue on, if you're ready for those.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Wonderful. All right, I'm going to start. I'll start this one for Greg. What kind of monitoring hardware do I need to get the right data from the Envirosuite software?
Yeah, Merce, that's a great question. So the most critical thing in this situation is the weather information, is hyper-local weather information. As we talked about before, traditionally, people would have a weather station on site and just take that local data. But what's actually critical is understanding exactly at your facility what's going to happen in the coming hours and the coming days. And Envirosuite has obviously spent a lot of time and energy on research and developing, understanding that piece. And then marrying it up with the measurement technology. As I mentioned, the measurement technology, IoT, is evolving. There's tons of companies out there developing this hardware technology that you can then marry our software up with to actually read it in to give you that information and that insight.
Great. This one for Marc. How does the mobile vapor system reduce the required manpower and water transportation?
Right. So all of our equipment, we certainly strive to sort of position it as liberating manpower rather than necessitating it. So there's two questions in there. In terms of liberating manpower or reducing the need, right? The equipment is full of sensors. That's the whole cloud-based part of it, right? And it's got a lot of communications. There's an onboard router and PLC and these things like this. And so what that means is ultimately the machine is semi-autonomous, right? Now, the mobile one does run off a generator, so it requires someone to turn it on. Other than that, it's sort of, you'd call fire and forget. This particular one you see here, these guys work, there's 3 days of work, 3 days a year that they don't operate at this landfill. It's insane. And they turn that machine on at 5 in the morning and turn it off about 6 at night. And I get a text every single time, and I can set my clock, my watch by it just about. And that's all they're doing. They walk up, turn it on, turn on the machine, done. Meaning, if, clearly it's not a black hole, it needs filled with material, for instance, with neutralizer, but it reaches out and says, we have a program to send out alerts and alarms of this is working, this isn't working, this is a temperature. Fortunately, we don't get those too often. The one we get the most is, hey, come fill me up. And there are critical levels that. And so clearly that's pretty, relieving of manpower. The water issue is really important because we don't use water. We call it a waterless vapor system. The totes that you saw, that is the product. There's no water added to it or anything like that. And so, we're not bringing water in, and especially you contrast that, for instance, with a vapor or with a misting system, which is somewhat traditional in the industry, right? You see these big misting systems, but those clearly go through tons of water. They add unnecessary water to the ground sometimes. But the main thing is they simply, trying to go out and catch a gaseous odor molecule with a water droplet is like trying to catch up to a semi out on the highway on your bike, right? You need things to be as close to they can in the same state, the same physical state. So a vapor and a gas, now you have much greater probability of contact, which is what is absolutely necessary for odor neutralization to occur. They have to come in contact to manifest a chemical reaction, right? And so the vapor phase is clearly an advantage in that respect as well, but especially for the water.
Another question we got. So sorry, Mark. Another question we got was, how big of a site can you accommodate, specifically if we're talking landfills, and then to piggyback off that, if you work with MRFs as well?
Sure. So it's an interesting question because I would previously answer, we've gone out 3,500 feet in places, meaning 2 legs of about 1,700 feet apiece. So we can have quite a long reach. As a matter of fact, that particular installation, they did a smoke test video where they were, what's the word? I want to say animate because it was smoke, trying to illustrate what the vapor actually looks like, the kinetic energy, the lift and everything to demonstrate what the vapor is really doing. That said, I wouldn't recommend one anymore. We changed our thinking as a company, and we want to be up on the work face as often as we can, as close as we can. In this particular site here, you can see it's hard for someone looking at it to know, but in the lower right-hand corner, and you can see, yep, right there, that's the unit. And there are inflatable lay flat hose lines going in either direction. Anyone who's been in the industry or even close can recognize we are right on top of the work face. It's a matter of angles. I always liken it to, a hockey goalie coming out of net, guys coming on a breakaway, take away his angle. The closer you get, obviously, the greater advantage you have of contact. And that's what we're trying to do here. So I wouldn't turn down installing a perimeter system if they insisted that's what they needed, but I would try my damnedest to talk them out of it and say, this is really the new, wiser approach. We've evolved it. I'm not going to say we've perfected it. I would never want to say that, but we really understand how to do it right now. This mobile system is the way to do it. You had another part of that question.
It was if you work with MRFs, and I will also continue that, though we have another question of also, do you work with wastewater treatment facilities? So you can take both of those, but yes, it was MRFs, and then also with wastewater treatment facilities. Yeah,
100%. So especially with the case of MRFs, we actually, we evolve another technology, which is carbon scrubbing. And, the traditional thinking, of course, is for MRFs, combining misting systems for odor control and dust control. You can do that in a lot more sustainable way with actually carbon scrubbing. We've evolved carbon scrubbing technology quite a bit, and we're fortunate to have a deep bench scientifically with strategic partners in identifying the correct, carbon is like almond milk these days. right? There's about 40,000 different kinds of almond milk I think you can buy. And carbon is really the same way. You know, it can be bituminous coal, it can be coconut shell based, it can have various numbers of impregnations, and those are all based on the certain chemistry that we're going to be working with: ammonia, H2S, etc. And so, along with another technology we have, we can actually reduce dust. It's called electrostatic precipitation filtration. We can eliminate dust and odor with carbon scrubbing, even more so than actually with a vapor system or a misting system. And that same mentality applies to wastewater as well. Wastewater, you know, can become a little bit more of a, can be very esoteric. You can have a lot of outside things. Again, now you're back into the sort of landfill open air space. You can have indoor environments, but we have tools for all the various applications. And again, every one of them we pair up with Envirosuite to measure efficacy and efficiency.
Great. Speaking of Envirosuite, I'm gonna get Greg back in on the conversation here. We got one for you. Can the Envirosuite software show that odors be caused outside of the landfill?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Marissa. And the power in it is it's actually showing you what's happening. So this isn't about just specifically, let's prove or disprove the landfill itself, but it's showing you what's going on in and around the landfill. As I mentioned before, a lot of times landfills have other facilities nearby. I was recently at a public meeting where the landfill was being accused of the odors when the software and the technology clearly showed that it was coming from a neighboring facility. And so that's really, it's that level of transparency and it's that detail in the system. It will tell you where it's coming from, whether it's coming from the landfill or not.
And then Greg, I'll keep it. Another question for you is, what other predictive information does the Envirosuite software provide other than maybe weather forecasts?
Yeah, that's a great question as well, because so obviously understanding the weather and the detailed weather forecast is important, but then translating that into operationally, what do I do different to take that information, operate more efficiently, and minimize my potential environmental impact. And we've talked about a couple of those here. You know, Marc was talking about deploying, odor mitigation technology, deploying emitting systems, the portable systems where you can actually locate them correctly. If you understand, tomorrow what your weather pattern is going to be and where you might have, which side of your landfill you might be getting odor transmitting off of it, going into a neighboring community, then you can actually relocate the system and turn it up, turn it down, or even in some cases turn it off if it's not needed.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's the power in it. It's understanding the science and the technology to make your decisions. And that's really where we sit.
Marc, I didn't know if you have anything else to add to that before I pitch you the next question for you.
Oh, no, just something Greg said, because it's something he brought up that I should have mentioned that we've actually brought up in a video that we did together that sort of counterintuitively turn it off. There might even be, a reason to just turn it off, save some money, save some carbon footprint.
Yeah.
And so, Marc, in keeping with you, the next question we have is the neutralizer used in the Byers vapor and atomization unit specifically targeting emissions common to landfills?
Yes, we have. See, it's funny. The client I was just referencing just texted. There it was. They just turned it off. I'm not lying. Yeah, actually, there are. I'll tell you, I get a text from every single machine that we have in North America, to the extent that I have to put my phone on silence from 11 to 6 at night, or I would never sleep. Anyway, yeah, we fortunately, with our partnership with OMI, they do formulate neutralizers for specific chemical compositions is really the way we would look at that, right? You could say landfills, but we're really looking at particular compounds that we know are going to be pretty consistent off of the work face, for example.
And then
as opposed to, for instance, a different formulation potentially for a wastewater treatment center, as an example.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Marc, finally, in closing, the last question, I'll pose it to you. If you could just explain the pipe distribution system and how it stands up in changing weather conditions and is able to deliver a consistent and controllable odor neutralizing product.
Right. Okay. So if whoever had the mouse there and found the unit real well, so that white sort of line extending in either direction. So in this instance, that's lay flat hose. It's 6-inch lay flat hose that, and we're always experimenting with different materials to see about durability. But that hose is perforated to a very specific number of holes and size of holes and spacing of holes. And that is always predicated on the distance that we're going. So it is custom for this particular installation. And so then the underside of that, we actually, this was actually the operator's idea. We applied Flex Seal to it to add an extra level of abrasive resistance. This happens to be on some rock. And actually, so it's great. You learn from your customers sometimes as well, because it keeps the material light, flexible, and still strong. The way the systems are engineered, they do provide a consistent pressure, a static pressure at each hole. The whole point of that is so we have a balanced delivery of vapor coming out of every hole, so that we know what is happening at near the system is the same amount of vapor that's going further out, for instance. It's a lot of engineering.
And I think I'll jump in there because that's what makes the partnership so strong. We're both based on science. We're both based on technology. And that's what's always impressed me with Byers Scientific and Marc.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a great place to close. I appreciate you both joining us today. It was a great presentation. I think we all got a lot out of it. So again, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marissa. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again to our sponsors and everybody for joining us today for Recycling Today Media Group's Today's Innovations. We hope you got a lot out of it, and we will see you at the next one. Thank you.